Welcome back. Bienvenue and all that jazz. It's time to continue the recent reads catch up. I am still playing catch up. This year has been kind of a crazy year for me, just both personally and professionally. So I haven't had the oomph to film as much, but I'm trying to get all caught up. So last we spoke, I was wrapping up the books that I read in May. So we will continue on with the books that I read in June. And so in June, I had a terrible reading month, apparently. I read 7 books, totaling 3,176 pages, and just shy of 25 hours of audiobook time, and my average rating was around 3.9 stars. So not terrible, but also not great. Like you'll see when we get around to my July, August, September, etc. I read a lot more and I liked those books a lot more, but that's okay. So without further ado, we'll just jump straight into the books that I did manage to get around to. So as usual, we will go in ascending star order from my least favorite book to my most favorite book of the month. And so my least favorite book that I read in the month of June was Captive Prince by C.S. Pacat. I read this with Elle from Elliot Brooks. She has been doing this kind of long-running project reading fantasy romance, so you can stay tuned for her thoughts on this book. But this book, I ended up giving 2 stars, and that might have been generous. Like, I was actually quite mad about this book. So if you don't know, it's marketed as like romance, and it's not. It's it's maybe dark romance if we're being generous, but it's really just not. And if you look, I'll try to find it when I edit and post this, but there is these new covers that are coming out that look like that cute cartoony style that looks very similar to her young adult series that I have also read. And it's partially on me because I didn't read anything about the synopsis. I was just like, oh, I've read like 2 books by C.S. Pacat in the past. Like, sure, why not? Like a more romance heavy male, let's go. And like yeah, it kind of glorifies sexual assault. It romanticizes things that should not be romanticized. There's children, there's force, there's lots of things. And I know that the argument sometimes for some of this stuff is like, oh, well, it's just showing how terrible the nobility. Like, I hear what you're saying, but like I know where the people finished, and like I think I'm supposed to be like, ooh, spicy, and like not to kink shame. I mean, anybody. Like if you're into consensual non-consent or BDSM or any of the kind of more risque things, shall we say, like more power to you. Like get your rocks off how you want to get your rocks off. However, this was not consensual non-consent. This was non-consent. Like there was force, there was all kinds of things. There was moments where we were in the character's head when a different character was forcing a different slave to perform fellatio on them, and we know how he started to get into it and where he finished and etc etc, and just like it was no, like like romance, who is she, where was she, not here, like yeah, no, it's a hard no for me. And I assume that the romantic relationship that we are going to end up following is between this quote unquote captive prince and the person who ends up kind of owning him, because the kind of setup of this is we meet this prince at the start of the book, and there is this violent coup where his brother takes over and he gets kind of bartered away as a political pawn to this neighboring kingdom as a sex slave, and kind of things ensue from there. So it is very political machination-y. So if you go into it almost like a grimdarky political thing with like graphic sexual content, then maybe it's better. Maybe, I don't know. No, I don't think so though. It's a no from me for Captive Prince. The next book that I read was Daughter of the Merciful Deep by Leslye Penelope, and this was a 3.75 star read. So there was quite the drastic jump from Captive Prince to everything else I read this month. And it was solid. Like it wasn't my favorite thing ever. It is a historical fantasy set in these forgotten dam towns where in the kind of Jim Crow South era, there were these peoples that were going around buying out the land from these towns so that they could flood them with dams and kind of for whatever reason. And it was okay. Like, I don't know, the historical elements didn't really speak to me all that much. And then when we got into the more magical things, it just never really 100% gelled for me. Like, I didn't love the characters. The world building was cool. But I don't know, like I'm just not a huge historical fiction, historical fantasy person. And so if you are much more into that, then I think that this might be a great book for you, maybe. It's also always a joy to see anything that's not just like European focused folklores. So I did enjoy the African mythology and elements and the care that the author took to kind of explore those things. I did enjoy it. And especially there were elements that were almost Portal Fantasy-esque that I don't want to spoil too much about, but like I it was a solid book. So I would definitely recommend you reading it if any of those things kind of appeal to you. And then this is also the month that I buddy read The Ending Fire by Saara El-Arifi with Jashana. And this, she has since posted like a full review of the entire series, so she's way more on it than I am, which, surprise, surprise. But this is the conclusion to the Ending Fire trilogy, which started with The Final Strife, and then... Oh my god, why can't I remember any of the names of anything? Whatever. I read these several months ago. Don't judge me. But The Ending Fire, I gave 4 stars, and it was a overall solid conclusion to the trilogy, but there were some elements that were not my favorite. There were just things that felt a little bit convenient, a little bit contrived. The ending was set up to be very powerful and then was kind of undermined. So there are just things that held it back. I still really loved the world and the lore and the journey that we went on, and I would highly recommend this as an overall trilogy. However, like the ending itself was probably the weakest of the 3 books for me personally, which is always kind of disappointing because I always kind of hope for that trilogy where all 3 books are just like mind-blowing, but this one just, it was okay. It was okay. It was aight. And there was like one particular reveal that I don't want to go too much into that both Tishan and I, when we were buddy reading it, were like, was this supposed to be a reveal? Because like it was not even foreshadowed heavily. It was basically stated on page what was going on. And then later on, it was like, oh, did you know? Ooh. And I was like, so that was supposed to be a reveal? And there was just a couple moments like that where things were cited on page in the text kind of right before a dramatic reveal would happen. And so it just every single time was undermining the reveals left and right. And there was one particular element where there was this kind of brainwashing of a particular character in a kind of cultish environment. And Homegirl just guzzled the Kool-Aid like there's no tomorrow. There was no like, oh, it smells if no, it was just like bottoms up, beer bonging the Kool-Aid. Like it was kind of ridiculous. And I was just like, okay, well, cool, I guess. But like I still overall really recommend the trilogy. It was a good time. There were satisfying answers to questions that had been kind of bubbling since book 1, and it was a good ending, just not the ending that I had completely hoped for. Then up next, I read Goddess of the River by Vaishnavi Patel. This is the second of her kind of Indian retellings. And this one in particular is a retelling of the Mahabharata, which I know very little to nothing about. But we follow the goddess of the river Ganga, which in the US, I believe we call the river Ganges, in India, and kind of the mythology around that. And the first third to half of this book, we follow the kind of origin legend of this mystical figure Ganga and her circumstances, how she bucks against Shiva and all of these other things. And I enjoyed those elements. It was kind of the back half of the book where there was this time skip and this kind of refocusing around actual humans. And I didn't care as much. I really just wanted to follow the kind of mystical stuff that was going on with Ganga. So that's what kind of pulled it down to just 4 stars for me. But I still think it's really a fantastic book. And I know that like retellings are kind of old hat at this point, but that's kind of Greek retellings that I think everybody is sick of. And I don't know how many people actually know the Mahabharata and some of these like Indian myths and legends. So I think it's always good to kind of broaden our horizons. So I think it was really still quite a fun read and would recommend it to you. It just wasn't my favorite book of the year, but that's okay. Like not every book can be your favorite. And then the next book I read was another buddy read with Elle. I just apparently was buddy reading this month. And that was Ascendant by Michael R. Miller. And it was another 4-star read. And this is a self-pub dragon writer fantasy. So if you're somebody who likes classic dragon fantasy with boy meets dragon, boy bonds dragon, they go on adventure and get embroiled in like dragon rider politics, kind of Aragon-esque, then this is a fantastic version of that. And it kind of has a lot of elements that make it more quote unquote modern fantasy. There's a bigger emphasis on the character and the development with his dragon. His dragon is blind, and like in this world, the dragons that normally have killed him. And so there's a lot of kind of coming into his own and bucking against traditions and things that I think speak to people. And there's also a fantastic adventure plot. And there's also this evil, mysterious kind of scourge, these like insecty like creepy beings that are kind of under the world, which reminded me a lot of Dragon Age Origins. So if you're a video game person and you ever play Dragon Age Origins with the Blight, where there's the darkspawn kind of percolating underneath the crust of the earth and kind of popping out at times, this book has elements similar to that, and I just really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed Holt and Ash, the boy and his dragon. I enjoyed their journey. I enjoyed learning more about this world. It was just a good, fun old time, which we're always kind of here for. But it's kind of one of those books that I don't want to say too much about. Just like go on the fun journey. If you are all into dragon fantasy in any way, shape, form, then you should definitely be checking out Ascendant. And I know that sometimes people, especially people of my generation, which is kind of the millennials, we kind of were growing up thinking that like self-pub fantasy is like lesser in some way, but I'm here to tell you that there are so many fantastic self-pubs out there, and Ascendant is just one of those, and I feel like it's actually quite popular. I feel like I see it in my local Barnes & Noble, so he must be doing pretty well to have his books in Barnes & Noble even when he's a self-pub author, so definitely check it out, and you can thank me later, so you're welcome. And then up next, I also read Dragon Keeper by Robin Hobb. This is book 1 of the Rain Wild Chronicles, and it's another 4-star, so it was good, but I went into this with very bizarre expectations because I've always heard about the Rain Wild Chronicles as basically YA, and I don't know what YA other people are reading, but as somebody who reads a decent amount of YA, I feel like especially compared to other booktubers of my age who have kind of aged out of YA, I don't know what YA you guys be up here reading, but this one has a abusive marriage, a hidden kind of queer relationship that kind of feeds into that abusive marriage. There's somebody trying to find themselves and to escape this situation that they're in. There are body horror elements, especially in the later books, because I have since finished this quartet and I'm now working on Fitz and the Fool. But like, there is one POV section, because there's multiple POVs. We follow some characters from the Live Ship Traders trilogy. We follow some new characters that we're just meeting, and then we also follow this kind of group of outcasts in the Rain Wilds who have been affected by the location that they live in. They have scales or different things like claws, and so they're kind of ostracized by their community as other, and they are there. And I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give away like things that happen in other series, because this definitely is kind of the direct sequel series to the Live Ship Traders. But they end up in a situation where they have to travel up the river helping transport something. And they are younger, and there's this weird blending of like animal and people with this like mating instinct that gets a little bit awkward at times. And like they're also kind of, I think, teens, a lot of them. So I get the elements where people feel like it's YA because there is that one perspective or set of perspectives that is these teen keepers kind of going through their horny phases. But the rest of it is like abusive marriage and escaping from it and finding yourself and like all these other things. So I don't know, like, I just don't understand people when they're like, it's YA. Like, yes, the Rain Wild Chronicles is my least favorite series. I don't know. It might be my second least favorite because I really don't like Farseer all that much. But it's not YA. Like, people be lying out here if they're telling you that series is YA. And then the last book I'll talk about is my favorite book of the month and my only 5-star from that month, and that was When the World Tips Over by Jandy Nelson. This was another buddy read with Jashana, but this was just everything I ever wanted. It was so good. The way that Jandy Nelson utilizes language and metaphor to kind of evoke that feeling of childhood and that wonder that you have on the world, that kind of layer of fantasy over everything, and how visceral everything feels when you're that age. She just captures it like nobody else. And this story in particular, we follow so many different POVs. It's a story of generational trauma, generations trying to like break the cycle of hidden like family secrets coming to light and how that can just percolate through generations. She always has a fantastic queer representation. So there is one queer character in particular that like just spoke to me. Like, it was me on a plate, if you will, because he was this character who has all of this pressure from his family to be the perfect one, where he's expected to have great grades. He's expected to not really like deviate and just kind of get it done. And just like, I related so much to him. And just Jandy Nelson must know some gay people, because the way she talks about Grindr and like the queer experience and coming, like, it's just, it really is, speaks to that experience so well, to people who grew up in the 90s and 2000s and what it was like and what it's like coming out. And she always tells these stories in these small California towns. And I come from a small California town in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And so it just is like one of those experiences where it just is, it spoke so much to me because I saw so much of my experience and myself growing up in this character. So that also just took it to a whole nother level. And I can't recommend it highly enough. Like, When the World Tips Over is so good. Her books are not related to each other. They're not series or anything. They're all standalones. And I know that people tend to look down their noses because it's YA contemporary, but like, it is so good. And the family drama and all of the things that ensue, I think, speak to people from all ages. And just, I would just encourage you to get over yourself and read it, because it's like so good. I loved it so much. And I wish that more people would read it. I think Shoshana and I are the only two people that I know of that have ever read that book. So like, you should read it and come back, scream in the comments with me, because I need to hear more about When the World Tips Over. It is so freaking good. But anyways, that does it for all of the books that I read way back when in the month of June. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to hear from you. If you want to talk spoilers, as always, just say spoilers, hit a bunch of enters, and let's chit chat in the comments. If you just want to leave an emoji to let me know that you're here, leave some kind of rainbow for When the World Tips Over, because it's just colorful and magical and everything that I ever wanted. But that will do it for today's video. So please do all the things. Like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more bookish shenanigans like this from me. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!